Now, just a bit about Ekasi Properties, which is basically a project that is dedicated for the empowerment of our people. We do this by holding these Saturday sessions, by sharing other informational, educational information around finances mainly, more than anything else, because we believe that our people need to be empowered through financial education more than anything else. You would know that our freedom came as political freedom. We are still striving to find economic freedom, and that can only be achieved through financial education. And hence we have these sessions to empower ourselves. Now, we are going to just get into the topic. And I wonder if you know what financial freedom is. And what does it mean to you? What is it that you do for money? Do you love the things that you do for money? If money was not the issue, what would you do between 8 and 5 on weekdays? Because currently your life is only over the weekend. On weekdays, there's things that you need to do and you have to do. Imagine if you had a choice of doing those things or not. If you were financially free, if you did not have to worry about money at all, how would your life change? And today we have Thando, a financial education specialist, who's going to be taking through this topic around financial freedom. Thando, over to you, and thank you so much for agreeing to share the knowledge with us this morning.
Okay, awesome. Hi, I don't know if anyone here is familiar with me, but most people know me as Small Steps to Freedom because that's what appears on social media. Let me just present my screen quickly. Like, I'm the face behind Small Steps to Freedom, which is, Okay, so Small Steps to Freedom is essentially about financial education, financial wellness, and really financial freedom, which is why I started it in the first place. It's been about a year now of us being with Small Steps to Freedom, and it's been amazing just educating people. I do it mostly via YouTube, but I am very active on Twitter and trying to be on Instagram at the moment. But there is also a Small Steps to Freedom website that's coming up pretty soon. I think by January next year, it should be up, where I'm going to be offering like coaching services as well, centered around financial freedom. So even though I talk about like credit, debt, insurance, investing, and everything like that, I talk about all of that just because it all leads back to financial freedom, which is what Small Steps to Freedom is also kind of named from. Actually, a fun fact about is I call this Small Steps to Freedom because when I started it and actually talk to the steps to make it a little bit more and show people the small but at the end of the day. The website is also coming soon enough. That website is going to be very interesting because it will be very centered on how to achieve financial freedom. More like, I don't know if you have seen maybe Stealthy Wealth focuses more on fire. That's the path that I'm on as well. So that's also what the focus will be on that website. So if you want to reach me, you can find me on all those platforms, especially YouTube for the financial education part. There is a video out every single week, which has been a lot of work, but it's been very rewarding to be able to actually release an engaging topic every single Wednesday there. Cool. So just to start off, if you follow me on Twitter or Instagram as well, you'd have noticed that I post a lot of them there. So the quote that I'm starting with is actually from Robert Kiyosaki. And it says, more important than the how, we achieve and really because I'm starting to go to market and pay for all these things. We're always thinking about the how, but never necessarily the why we actually want to do it and why it brings us joy and so on. So I think that's why this quote is super powerful to me, and that's basically the focus of like this short presentation that I'm going to be going into now. And please do feel free to just drop like questions in the chat as I go along. I structured the presentation so that if you have questions, you can jump in and then we can have a discussion about that as well. Okay, so what is financial freedom? So if you actually go on Google and say, what is financial freedom? You'll probably find the definition that's based on FIRE. And I think financial freedom can be defined in different ways. So I'm going to start with FIRE. So FIRE is financial independence to retire early. And this is more of a movement that essentially advocates for the belief, or for the, it's actually practical, so necessarily belief. So it advocates for living frugally, living below your means, making as much money as you can so that you can actually retire much earlier than the normal retirement age. So we know that people retire at the age of 65, but people in the FIRE movement or can actually afford to retire at the ages of like 30 or 35, which is like half the time that it actually takes if you're doing the normal route. So that's the movement that I am part of, and that kind of is split into two different things. So there's a financial freedom part, and then there's a retire early part. So you don't necessarily have to retire once you're actually financially free, but it does give you the option to if you want to. So if you do Google financial freedom or financial independence, it's going to give you the standard definition of how much money do you need to actually stop working, and how much money do you need for you to survive without needing to have any money coming in for the rest of your life. And that's the FIRE definition. And that also comes with a really handy calculation that's based on a 4% rule. So the 4% rule is basically a rule about withdrawing from your investments. So you can afford to withdraw up to 4% of your investments each year without actually basically spending all your money. So that 4% is supposed to be replaceable within the next year and all of that. And that calculation is really great if you want to understand just the sheer amount of money that you would need to actually retire. Like an easy way to actually get that number is just multiplying your yearly expenses by 25, and then that's how much you need in investments for you to retire. But before I go on a tangent about FIRE, I think financial independence does encompass way more than just the amount of money that you need to retire. It also talks to peace of mind and actually being able to make money and being able to keep your money and make it grow. And the peace of mind part is very big in terms of why people actually try to get to financial freedom, because money can be a very stressful thing, especially if you don't have enough of it. And also just being able to understand it and how it works and what investments are and how they work is also a whole different thing that's not necessarily covered in school. Actually, it's not covered at all in school, which is very disappointing if you take into account the fact that the relationship that you have with your money is basically the most constant and the most guaranteed relationship you probably have in your life. You always have to deal with money, regardless of what happens in your life. And that's the peace of mind part, is that if you, for example, if you're deeply in debt, your peace of mind can be actually interfered with, because you're always thinking about money and how you're going to pay off that debt, or how you're actually going to put food on the table. And the making money part of it is very important, because like if you can't make the money, then you can't necessarily be financially free, right? So with the making money part of it, I think what's really important to think of there is just being flexible and being able to actually create ways of actually making money. So there's obviously the 9 to 5 where you have your job and everything. I think that is great. Maximizing that is awesome. Always finding ways to actually get the best paying position, but like the best paying job that you are able to get, that you're actually happy with. And that's another tricky part, finding a job that you're actually happy doing. But it also speaks to adapting with the environment, knowing what you like and being able to actually experiment and make some money. And obviously increasing your income streams is really key. And I like you guys are already on Ekasi Properties page, which speaks to your interest in property. And property is just one of those things that you can actually invest in, and then it can become a different income stream, or like dividends from your stock investments also create a form of like a different income stream. And then keeping and growing your money part is where the magic is at. Because what I found is that even though you might think that people struggle making money, some people don't actually struggle that much in terms of actually making the money, but it's the part of keeping and actually growing the money that gets tricky, because it's really hard to kind of step back and say, okay, I've made a certain amount of money, but I want to put a set amount for my future. When you keep getting the money each month and it just doesn't feel like it's going to be stopping at any point, the sense of agency is just not there. So I think the keeping the money and growing it is very key, and that's where it gets a little tricky, because there's responsibilities that you might have. I know for people coming from a background like myself, for example, you might have responsibilities of actually making sure that those behind you also can actually get the same opportunities that you get. So like trying to send other people to school and so on. They call it black tax, but I've started getting a little annoyed with the term black tax, so I'm trying to avoid it for now. But this is like information that you can learn, especially in terms of like if you research online, especially even on social media, there's a lot of like really educational people there, who help kind of guide you into like a certain point where you're able to actually research the stuff yourself. But keeping growing on money, besides the education part and the practicality part, there's also the emotional part and the responsibility part that gets a little tricky for us. So I know I've been talking a lot about what financial freedom is, but it can be very complex, and not complex, but it has a lot of moving parts to it that we don't necessarily recognize. Every time people think about financial freedom, it's just like, oh, you need so much money, but it's also about why you actually want it. You want the peace of mind, you want the comfort, you want to be able to live life on your own terms, really, at the end of the day. And that's what financial freedom really does speak about to me. I think someone dropped a question there. I just want to check it quickly. Did anyone drop a question there?
Yes, there is. I think you was wanting to know, how do you join FIRE?
Oh, how do you? So the great part about it is you don't necessarily have to join. It's essentially you just make the choice yourself, and you essentially do your research on what FIRE is and how it works and how people have actually achieved it, and then you start by yourself. The one component is also obviously like you have to be making quite a bit of money, because you know the conventional wisdom of you need to be saving 10% of your income. If you're part of the FIRE movement, you're saving way more than that. People in the FIRE movement save I think at least 50% of their income, up to like 70 or 80% even in some cases. So the making money part of it becomes a very big focus if you're part of the FIRE movement, in actually increasing your income streams, definitely not impossible. And the most common question I actually get about the FIRE movement is that people assume that it's only in America or Australia or wherever else. And people in South Africa are actually in the same movement, and people have actually achieved it in South Africa as well, which I think speaks volumes to the fact that it actually is possible. And depending on like what your targets are and the type of lifestyle you would like to live after you reach that point, it's definitely possible. And I think once you decide you want something, you kind of just work backwards from there and make it happen. So you don't have to sign up for anything. You just have to understand the concept, and then you just start applying it to your own life, basically.
So Tando,
yeah.
Tando, are there
yes.
Are there platforms like where people get together like we do here in Ekasi Properties, or is there what I'm trying to find out? I know it's obviously I'm asking for the audience here. It's a movement. Okay. It's a movement that is within your beliefs. It's something that works with your belief system. But I just want to find out, are there platforms where people get together to discuss FIRE or whatever the case may be?
Yeah. So I do know there is a group on Meetup. I don't know, the Meetup is the app that you can download on your phone. There is a group that meets pretty regularly there. I'm not part of the group though, but I do know it exists. And I think I'm going to be trying to do as well is try to like have meetups around, specifically around FIRE. And yeah, I think that's what I think. Stealthy Wolf as well, if anyone knows about him, he also hosts meetups as well in terms of what FIRE is, because he's also part of the movement and very passionate about that. And he has covered a few people that have actually achieved FIRE in his blog posts. So if you go to his blog, stealthywolf.com, I think, you'll be able to see the stories about people who've actually worked towards it and are living the lifestyle now. Yeah. For too into FIRE, because I know about that forever. Just move on to the next slide there. So what I feel is like really, really key when it comes to actually establishing financial independence or financial freedom is knowing and understanding your why for financial freedom. So the reasons that I want to be financially free will not be the same reasons that you want to be financially free. It will definitely be different things, because we are different people. We're motivated by different things. So for example, I want to be financially free, not work that day and not have that feeling of like, oh my God, now I have to call someone and say I won't be able to make it to work and all those things. But whereas someone else might want to be financially free because they want to spend more time with their children, or want to travel more, or they want to just have that flexibility of being like, I can just live in different countries each year. So everyone has a different motivation, but the one motivation that actually just comes to mind now, especially I think just about like people who have my type of background as well, or Black people in general, actually, is like the desire to just have like that generational wealth and actually getting your family as a whole to a point where you're financially stable. You can actually plan like and become like financially wealthy as a family. And I think that's a really powerful reason for wanting financial freedom for yourself as well as for your family. So it's important to kind of, before you even decide if financial freedom is for you, is to kind of step back. Or I think financial freedom is for everyone really, but I think it's important to kind of step back and understand and ask yourself, why do I want to be financially free? That could be, I just want to be debt free. I just want to owe anyone money. I just want to have a freer life or more flexibility and all of that. And I feel like if you understand why you want to do it, the how part of it is just it's just another question. Like once you understand why, you'll figure out the how. And there's a lot of information on the how part. Like the how part is really not complicated at all. Once you actually start doing your research and all of that and consulting the right people, it kind of falls into place. But no one will be able to tell you why you need to be financially free or why you want to be financially free. Like our motivations are just so different. That's why personal finance is called personal finance for a reason. Okay. Let me just move on to the next one. I think this is the next one, yes. So once you understand your why, and the why is so important. Like once you know your why, I would recommend that you actually write it down, because it kind of affirms the things that are in your head. Because sometimes, I don't know if this happens to other people, but sometimes they're just thinking of something, and once you start writing it down, it starts kind of falling into place and you understand it better and you can strategize better. So I would totally recommend just writing down your why and revisiting that why, because it might change as time goes on. So once you understand why you actually want to be financially free, I think the next step should definitely be setting your goals. So what are your goals? And this will really tie in back to your why. So you won't have your goals unless you have your why. So if you want to be debt free, then your one of your goals would be, I want to pay off all my debt at some point. Or if you want to be able to buy a home for your family, so you guys can have that asset running in the family, then your goal becomes, I want to buy a house by X amount of time. And what's important, and I think the SMART acronym is probably used like everywhere, but it's used everywhere because it is just that accurate from the SMART acronym strategic way. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, there's someone who's got, let's see. People, please unmute yourselves. Please mute yourself, not unmute, mute. I'm trying to find out. I think Cindy is on mute. Yeah. Okay. It's fine, Tando. Sorry about that. Let's go ahead.
Okay, no, that's fine. So I was just saying, like, setting your goals will really tie into your why. So once you understand your why, then setting your goals won't be that hard, because that's what you want. You're essentially just saying what you want and when you want it. So I think what's important when you're setting your goals is just applying the SMART acronym. Is like, your goals have to be strategic. It has to be measurable and it has to be attainable. You don't want to set goals for yourself that are like impossible for you to obtain in that amount of time. So for example, let's say you say, you know what, I want to make, or I want to have 10 million rands in the next 5 months. That's a little, like, unless you are in a position to do that already. For most people who are not. So it becomes an unattainable goal, and that's just demotivating at some point, because you're just like, oh, it's month 4 and I haven't made that amount of money, and then you just lose the motivation. So you want to make sure it is attainable and it is relevant for your life. So it's kind of like property. Actually, the relevant part is like, you always get the advice that you need to get into property, you need to buy a house, or you need to own a car or whatever, but is it relevant for your life? So for example, if you are like really young, like myself, and you don't necessarily know where you're going to be living in the next 5 years or in the next 2 years, or where your life is going to be in that amount of time. Buying a property in the city that you're living in currently might not be the smartest idea. Whereas it might be a smart idea for someone who already knows that this is where they want to live for the rest of their life. So you want to make sure that that goal is relevant for you, the same way that buying a car is great, but is it relevant for your lifestyle? Do you need a car? Does it help you with something? Is it an actual choice? Is it an actual practical choice for your set of circumstances? And the last thing is, you have to make sure that your goals are time-based. So time is everything. Time will actually help you to measure your goals and where you're at. So if you wanted to pay 100,000 rands worth of debt off in the next year or year and a half, you would have your target. So by the time you get to 6 months, and you haven't made movement there, then you know something is wrong, because you have that goal of actually reaching it at a certain point, and you are like 4 or 5 months in and you haven't made progress, then you can kind of like reassess and re-strategize. So I think it's really important to just make sure that your goals are measurable, they're attainable, they're strategic, they're relevant, and they're time-based, so that you actually make sure you're setting the right goals for yourself, and you're not just setting like, it doesn't end up just being like wishful thinking, if that makes sense. So let's move on. And the debt. So I always like to start with debt when I talk about financial freedom, because I think debt is where our financial freedom is. That's where the financial freedom starts getting taken away really slowly. And I remember like one of the most common things I hear from people is so you can translate it to your own language, but we say like umuntu uphila ngeskwelede, like you live, like a person lives by debt. And I think it speaks a lot into how we perceive debt and how it's kind of like taking over our lives really. Like you can't picture yourself surviving without being reliant on debt, and that's sadly like a reality for a lot of people in South Africa. And that statement really just sums up like the debt culture, if you'd call it that, in South Africa. So my thought process always goes back to the why. So why do we actually think that you can only live by debt? And why do we feel like we need debt to survive, or to live the lives that we want to live? And I feel like that ties a lot back into like lifestyle inflation. It ties a lot back into like the lack of understanding and education around debt. Because if you want to go and take out a personal loan today to build your house, the bank won't, when you get that personal loan, the bank won't be there saying, oh, you want to buy a house with this debt. All they care about is whether you qualify for it and whether you're actually going to be paying it back as they expect. They won't sit down there and start thinking on your behalf to say, oh, but if you want to buy a house, then you should be getting a home loan instead. They want, that's not necessarily a job. Or their job is to make sure that you can just pay the money back only, regardless of whatever happens. And I think that speaks a lot to the lack of like education, understanding, and just the lack of awareness being raised also from like the financial industry that kind of feeds into that whole debt cycle. But lifestyle inflation is definitely a big one. The whole idea of, oh, so now you're working. I remember when I graduated from university, it was a thing of, oh, so now you're working, so now you need to have a credit card, and now you need to buy a car. And it becomes like these expectations that are kind of like imposed about it already. But lifestyle inflation essentially just speaks to how when your income goes up, or when your sources of income go up, you then kind of increase the amount of comfort that you have in your life. So if I was earning 5,000 rands this month, and I was living in a house that was costing me 3,000 rands a month, for example, and then next month my income goes up and now I'm earning 15,000 rands, I'm going to be like, okay, now I have money. I can now get the nicer house, and I can live in much better comfort, and I can buy a car. But then what you don't understand is that those things are just kind of taking money out of your pocket, and they're not necessarily building you up for the future, if that makes sense. And lifestyle inflation will always happen regardless of whether it's happening quite a lot or it's just a little bit. But the trick is about actually controlling it and not actually financing it using it, because you keep paying debt off over and over and over again. And I just want to say, like, know your why when getting into any form of debt. So before you take out, like, you take out any type of debt, you should be asking yourself, why do I want this type of debt? Why do I need a personal loan, or why do I need a car? So why do I need a car loan? So that you know what your reasons are. Because sometimes maybe you're actually taking it out because there is a lot of pressure on you to do certain things, or people expect certain things from you, and you feel the need to actually meet those expectations. And once you actually ask yourself that, you're able to be honest with yourself on your reasons why you want to get into it. And you might actually find that you don't even need a lot of the debt that you might be incurring. But with that, obviously, I do understand that there is some debt that you can actually if you're a real investor and you have home loans that you buy properties that give you, for example, so that type of debt, even like education debt, like your student loans, for example, even though I really don't like the concept of student loans, but even that type of debt is something that you're taking out with expectation that it's going to make you money in the future. I think someone dropped another question there. Oh, yeah, we need to leave that debt culture behind. But it is definitely a culture. And I think also one of the I read a book actually that was talking about black tax, and it was essentially a collection. I can't remember the name of the book, but it's essentially a collection of stories from different people, where they were talking about their experience with black or tax, help members out and things like that. And I found there was this one really interesting story where this person had ended up just accumulating so much debt because they wanted to show that their family had access to certain things now that they are working. Okay, now I've graduated, so now my family expects these different things. And they were busy buying their family like houses and cars and paying for everyone's education and all of that, but they were literally financing all of that with debt. Just because they could access the credit, they used it to finance everyone's lifestyle around them. So as you can imagine, once they stopped having access to that credit, the entire kind of like house of cards fell apart at that point. And I think that's the saddest part about debt, is like once you can't actually afford to service it, it will literally fall apart overnight. And that's just sad. Okay, and just move on. So good and bad debt. So on principle, I believe that there's just debt. There's not necessarily any good or bad debt. I think it's really just debt, because you can turn good debt into what people consider as good debt into bad debt if you don't manage it correctly. So like secured debt, for example, and unsecured debt, I think that those are like that's like a nice separation in terms of what people consider good and bad debt. So car loans are considered like a secured debt, because if you fail to pay, the bank can come and take the car away, or they can come and take your house away. Whereas with unsecured debt, there's nothing to take away. Like once you've spent that money on your credit cards, there's like the bank can't claim anything back from you. So like debt is just debt. It's just a sum of money that you owe to someone at the end of the day. And I think once we start thinking of it that way, then we start actually contextualizing it into our own kind of situations, because using a car loan might be a good idea for one person, but not such a good idea for someone else. Or a home loan, for example, might be a good idea, as I explained before, might be a good idea for one person, but not the greatest idea for someone. But it is important to actually recognize what like a secured, unsecured debt is, and actually think about the things that you actually need from that debt. And on the you notice the home loan stuff, I think I like this comment, like, let's get educated. So very insightful if you think about like lottery winners and how if you don't have money today and you don't understand how to manage it today, is a little bit of a tangent, but I think I should comment. But if you don't have money today and you don't know how to manage money, and then someone comes and gives you 20 million rands or 50 million rands tomorrow, that really doesn't solve any real problems, because it will be so much money that you won't even be able to comprehend what you're actually going to do with that money, because it'll be like 50 million rands. What am I going to do with that? And I think that's why, like, the guys who go on Blue It, on I Blue It a lot, I usually like lottery winners, because it can be very overwhelming when you come across such a large amount of money if you've never really known how to manage money, because managing money isn't necessarily about having a lot of money to manage. It's about managing what you have. Even if you have 5,000 rands, or if someone else has 100,000 rands, if you know how to manage your 5,000 rands, you're better off than someone who has 100,000 rands and they can't manage that money. So I really like the Blue It comment. But yeah, so just going back to the debt thing, it can definitely be used to actually acquire assets that bring in you more income, or you can leverage debt to acquire assets, which is great. And I think a lot of real estate investors actually do this a lot, and it can work out for you if you know exactly what you are doing. But I think it's also important to just think of debt as just that. It's just debt. It's just money that you owe to someone. Okay, and then go back here. So always have a plan to pay off any debt that you have. And I think this speaks a lot to, like, especially credit card debt, because you just swipe and you don't necessarily think about it. But I think when you take out any debt, you need to be thinking, okay, when do I plan on paying this off? And how am I actually going to pay this off? Where am I actually going to get the money to pay it off? And that gives a lot more perspective into the why you're actually taking out the debt, as well as like how you're actually going to get out of debt, because you don't necessarily want to be in debt your entire life. I don't think anyone wants that for their lives, because debt does create anxiety, knowing that if you lose your job today, you still have to pay for your debts. For example, Omashonisa is like the one example. Those guys will still want their money regardless of whether your whole life is burning down. They'll still want their money. And I think you always have to make sure you always pay off, how you're actually going to pay off your debt. And also on the Omashonisa thing, please do not borrow money from Omashonisa, because those guys are not regulated. And yeah, the stories that we hear from there are just quite horrific. But yes, I think lifestyle inflation is definitely our weakness. It's kind of like human nature as well to want to live a certain level of comfort because you have the money to afford it, like why would you drive in a Polo when you can afford a Lamborghini, like, type of thing. So it's also about like just the showing of the money and other people seeing that we have the money. It's also like a price thing, and it's just, yeah, it can get really out of control very quickly. And I think it also speaks to just our need to be accepted, or our need to be perceived a certain way. But I think there are healthier ways to kind of I don't know, they get the same kickback. What is good debt to use to improve one's credit score rating? Oh, credit score. So sorry. So I think credit score is really important, especially when you actually are going to take on any debt. You need to know what your credit score is, what your credit report as a whole says, and because without it, you're really just, it's a mercy of the bank. Like, that's what the bank is looking at when they actually evaluate your credit application. They look at your credit report and say, okay, cool, Utando had a credit score of 200 and something. She's definitely not going to be able to afford this, or you don't trust that she's actually going to pay it off. And I find a lot of people actually go into debt without even knowing their credit score or what a credit score is. So just to answer that question real quick, on your credit score, one, you always have to, you want to know it, which sounds like you do. You need to know what your credit report as a whole says, what your credit history says. I think Clear Score gives a really great breakdown in terms of what happened month to month even, which I think is amazing. But when you actually are trying to build up your credit score, you should think of the things that actually make up your credit score. So one of the biggest things is like your repayment rate. So like how reliable are you in terms of actually repaying your debts? So you want to make sure you're actually making your payments on time. You want to make sure that you're not getting like overdrafts and things like that are like not in your plan, and you don't know how you're going to pay it off. So if you have a credit card, for example, you can have the credit card and pay it off every single month, and that does build up your credit score. But a really nice initiative that I've seen is that there's this, I think it's a rental app called Avely, where you can actually use your rent payments as a way to build up your credit score. So every time you pay your rent, it counts as a positive towards your credit score. The same way, like if you didn't pay your rent, then that kind of knocks down your credit score a little bit. So I'll say any debt, like credit cards are great for building up your credit score, as long as you're actually paying them off in full each and every month. Because once you start paying just the minimum on that, you are essentially just like getting into a hamster wheel, really, because you just keep paying the minimums every single month, and you're never necessarily paid off, and it won't necessarily appear as a good mark on your credit report. Okay, and then saving and investing. So I think we understand like what saving and investing are in principle. Much longer term thing, in terms of you want this money to go for you in the like during the course of the next 5, 10, 15 years, whereas saving is for basically the short term. So for example, if you're saving for like an emergency fund, you don't necessarily know when you're going to need that emergency fund. It could literally be tomorrow, it could be the day after that, it could even be in a year if you're lucky, but you know you're going to need that in the short term, and that's what saving is about. But investing is really about where it's at, where the growth is at, where the wealth building comes in. And regardless of whether we're talking about saving or investing, we're talking about the habit. And I think this is one of the biggest points when it comes to, if you are suggesting to someone that they could be saving or they could be investing, one of the pushbacks that you can get is, I just don't necessarily have enough money to even save or to invest. But then if you take a step back, it's really about building up that habit. If you have, if you say 300 Rand a month, 100 Rand a month, but you just don't do it because you say you don't have enough money to do it, then you are actually refusing to build the habit. So even when you have 1,000 Rands or 10,000 Rands to invest that you can invest, you still won't do it because you haven't built up the habit. Because it is at some level a skill for you to actually make sure you are saving and investing each month and making it a habit. It's kind of like working out. You can't just now just, okay, I'm going to run like the Comrades marathon when you've never even ran your entire life. You know, it just becomes very impractical at that point. So it's about the habit, it's about practicing the principle behind it. So saving and investing regularly, regardless of how small the amount may feel. And the other thing, this is a big one, 100,000 Rand a month. That doesn't mean that you can afford to spend 100,000 Rand a month, really, because at that point you won't be putting anything away. So what happens is that income stream also disappears. So living below means is what actually enables you to save and invest. So regardless of whether you have 10, 20 different versions of that, then you're really not making any progress. because you need that space to make any sort of progress. You need that space to be able to save and invest towards your future. And I think big picture planning and foresight are incredibly key. And I just put there on top of like income streams, asset allocation, wealth generation. And now, as I speak about the like big picture planning, I actually remember I saw a tweet on obviously Twitter where I think someone was asking how you can say no to your children when they want the latest gadgets, and that you want to maybe like invest and save that money towards their future for them. And I think that speaks a lot to the big picture planning, because if you think about kids, for example, kids are focused on the now. For them, it's about what's happening right now. Am I having fun right now? Am I getting what I want right when I want it? But the parent, your job is the big picture planning. Then you have to make the decisions in terms of, okay, so if we're going to do this now, how does that impact, and how does that impact our future plans and the life that we're trying to build, type of thing. So I think that tweet really reminded me of like how big picture planning is so important, especially if you have children, and just having that foresight of saying, we have our goals, we have the future that we want, so we need to be working towards that regardless of like the distractions that might arise at any point right now. So the big picture planning speaks to planning your income streams, getting your income streams up. I think COVID has really shown us that not that you can't survive, but you can't rely on this one income stream, like which for most people, like myself, is like your 9 to 5. But you have to try and have maybe a side hustle going, or like some kind of dividend income coming in, rental income coming in, even like maybe even renting your car out to like Uber or Taxify or both now. But yeah, so having like different income streams is really important for the big picture planning. It just really does give you a sense of security to know that if one source of income falls apart overnight, you have the other ones to actually lean on, so you won't necessarily be stranded. And when it comes to investing, I think I said asset collection, but it's supposed to be asset allocation. And I think that really is for the investing part of it. What you have to think about what you're investing in. Are you diversified enough? Do you have different assets investing in stocks? Or do you have properties? Are you investing in cattle? And so